We all love a good life story, whether it's a big, heavy biography, a memoir you can't put down, or one of those blockbuster biopics. We dive into these stories to get inspired, to learn, to understand someone's life. But here's the thing, behind every single one of them, there's a hidden ethical minefield, a real high-wire act for the storyteller. And it all boils down to one fundamental question. Right here. This is the question that haunts every biographer, every filmmaker telling a life story. Can you really capture the complete, total truth of a person's life? Or is every biography, in its own way, kind of a work of fiction? This single question, honestly, is the key to unlocking this whole ethical puzzle. It's because every life story is this constant balancing act between two really powerful and sometimes competing forces. On one side, you've got the objective facts, the dates, the places, the events, the stuff we can actually prove happened. But on the other side, you've got the subjective story. This is the why, the motivations, the emotions, the meaning behind all those facts. See, a biography isn't just a list of what someone did, it's an argument for who they were. And that's where everything gets so complicated. So that leads us right into our first big idea. This nearly impossible task of even defining what truth means when we're talking about a person's life. I mean, think about your own life for a second. It's not just the series of things you've done, right? It's this whole complex tapestry of what you were thinking, what you were feeling, your private fears, your secret hopes. That entire internal world is almost completely invisible to anyone else. A biographer, yeah, they can find letters, they can read diaries, but they can never, ever truly get inside the head of their subject. There's always going to be this gap between the external record and the internal reality.
And what's super interesting is how our whole idea of biographical truth has changed over time. We started out with this idea of positivism, basically just the facts, ma'am. The goal was to record history exactly how it actually was. Then, things shifted to a more phenomenological approach, which tried to capture the subject's unique, personal, lived experience. And today, we have a more postmodern view, which kind of suggests that any story is just one possible interpretation. The goal isn't so much about finding a single, perfect truth anymore, but about responsibly building one of many possible truths.
Okay, so if the idea of truth is that messy, that philosophical challenge leads directly to a very practical one. Suddenly, every single choice a biographer makes, what to include, what to leave out, becomes an ethical decision. Welcome to what I like to call the methodological minefield. And it all starts with the sources. What does the biographer choose to put in the book? And maybe more importantly, what gets left on the cutting room floor? Is a diary entry written in a moment of pure rage really a reliable source for how someone felt all the time? And what about the silences in the archives? The stories of people, so often women, minorities, who just weren't considered important enough at the time to have their lives documented. Ignoring those gaps, that's not just a research problem, it's an ethical one. And even after you've picked your sources, the dangers of interpreting them are everywhere. You've got anachronism. That's when we judge someone from, say, the 18th century using our 21st century moral compass. Big trap. Then there's the huge temptation to say why someone did something, to attribute motives when we can never really truly know for sure. And, of course, there's framing. Does the author build a narrative around the person's triumphs or their failures? Every single one of these choices gently nudges the reader toward a specific conclusion. So the crucial takeaway here is this. The biographer is never just a fly on the wall, a detached observer. They are an active participant, their own beliefs, their own biases. They're going to shape the story. And admitting that isn't a failure. It's actually the very first step toward telling that story ethically. And this brings us to the absolutely massive power of narrative. Because a biography, it doesn't just report on a person's legacy. For millions of people, it becomes their legacy. It literally creates it for generations to come. And this kind of power can lead to two really dangerous extremes. On one end, you have what's called heroification. This is where you sand down all the rough edges, ignore the flaws, and create this perfect, inspiring saint who never really existed. On the other end, you get demonization, basically a takedown piece that focuses only on the worst parts of a person. The real ethical challenge is to reject both of those easy paths and paint a picture of a complex, flawed, real human being. And of course, all of this gets dialed up to 11 when the subject is still alive. Because then the storyteller isn't just interpreting history, they are impacting a real person's life, right now. All these issues of privacy, of consent, of the potential to cause real harm to them and their family, they become front and center.
that ethical tightrope gets even higher and a whole lot wobblier.
This whole discussion naturally raises a question about a format we've all seen a million times: the biopic or the docudrama. What happens when storytellers intentionally start blending fact and fiction just to make the story more dramatic?
Well, this is a really unique ethical problem. These films, they often invent dialogue or they'll compress a decade into a single week for dramatic effect. The real danger here is something we could call the truthiness effect. The emotional power of what we're watching on that screen is so strong it makes the fictional parts feel true. And because of that, the ethical duty on the creator is transparency, pure and simple. They have to be clear with the audience about where history ends and where their creative license begins. So, with all these challenges, all these minefields, how can anyone, a writer, or even just us, the readers and viewers, navigate this world? Well, we can find some guidance by thinking of ethical frameworks as a kind of compass, a toolkit for helping us make sense of it all.
We can actually distill all these complex theories into 3 simple but really powerful questions. Looking through a virtue lens, the storyteller asks, am I, right now, being honest, fair, and humble? Through a duty lens, what do I owe to the person I'm writing about, to my readers, and to history itself? And finally, from a consequence lens, what's going to be the real-world impact of the story I'm about to put out into the world?
Ultimately, this is the core takeaway. This is the whole thing in a nutshell. An ethical biographer knows they can't capture some single, perfect, objective truth. It's an impossible goal. Instead, the real goal is to create the most honest, the most fair, and the most responsible representation of a human life that they possibly can.
So I'll just leave you with this final thought. If your life were turned into a story for other people to read or to watch, what would you hope the storyteller cared about most? Would it just be the bare facts? Or would it be the fairness, the nuance, and the basic honesty of the portrayal? What would you want them to remember?